If you are thinking about moving to Washington, D.C. in 2025, there are plenty of pros and cons of living here in D.C. And in this video, I am going to break down all of my pros and cons of living here in Washington, D.C. in 2025. Let's get into the video. All right, so obviously we got to talk about the pros of living here in DC. Number one is going to be the job market. Now I know what you're saying, right? Hey Chris, what about Dodge and all the changes coming on? Keep in mind, yes, Washington DC does have a large federal workforce, of course, but there's also a very stable economy with jobs like tech, healthcare, and defense contractors especially. And then over in Arlington, Virginia, you also have Nestle, Boeing, Amazon HQ2, in Bethesda, Maryland, you have Marriott. There are all kinds of different companies here in the Washington, D.C. region, and a lot of companies are actually headquartered here. So of course, the federal government is going through some massive changes, but keep in mind, Washington, D.C. has always had a very stable job market, which in turn makes a very stable housing market. So number one pro is going to be the job market here in D.C. Number two is going to be the culture and different amazing food scene. Now keep in mind, Washington, D.C. is one of the most diverse areas in all of the United States. I absolutely love it. There are all kinds of different restaurants to go to. We have as many Michelin star restaurants per block as Paris does here in Washington, D.C. So keep that in mind. D.C. has an amazing food scene. Most of them are going to be local in D.C. and a lot of restaurants that start out in New York City, they always end up opening a branch down here in D.C. and they want to tap into that DMV market here in D.C. So there definitely is a good international influence here. Some of the best neighborhoods to eat are going to be Adams Morgan, Chinatown, and U Street. And there's tons of food trucks, farmers markets, all kinds of different things going on. Speaking of another huge pro is going to be the Capital One Arena right over in Chinatown is going through a huge renovation. They are completely redoing that stadium or arena. I think it's somewhere to the tune of $600 to $700 million. We're going to be talking about new restaurants, new courts, new locker rooms, pretty much everything. And another cool thing, if you're into sports, the federal government, when Joe Biden had left office, they turned over the RFK Stadium site over to Washington, D.C., which I think is a huge pro. So the Commanders have not played here in D.C. for a long time. We'll look for D.C. to build a brand new stadium in the coming years, which will be very exciting because the RFK site is an amazing spot for a stadium. That's where the old Redskins Stadium was. But the cool thing is D.C. is planning on having year-long concerts and events going on all the time. So I definitely think that's a huge pro to living here in DC. Another huge pro, right, is going to be the rich history and all of the museums. Now, growing up here in the DC area, we used to go to the museums all the time and I kind of took it for granted, but keep in mind, one of the cool things is most of these museums are free. You can just walk right into them, or sometimes you do need to book a ticket. But obviously here in Washington, DC, we get the best of the best when you're talking museums. Some of my favorite are going to be the African American Museum, which is brand new. That is simply stunning and amazing. It is also very popular. And then of course the Air and Space Museum, you can go right down there into DC and you can see the Wright brothers plane, the Spirit of St. Louis, all kinds of different things. And the American Indian Museum, I could go on. And you could literally walk on out to the National Mall, see the White House. There are just so much to see here, all kinds of different museums. And then over in Chantilly, Virginia, they also have the larger Air and Space Museum. I am really into airplanes. I went over there and there was a Concorde, a former Air France one. There was also the space shuttle is also over there as well. That is definitely huge. You literally have world-class museums here, right? You got the Lincoln Memorial, Washington Monument, pretty much anything and everything. Every time I have a friend come here, they always come and visit. They want to go see all of the museums. We go and check them out and I see something new all the time. And DC makes it very convenient, nice, and clean. So definitely check them out. And that's one of the reasons that I think a lot of people move here is definitely for our culture here in DC. Now, one thing you might not realize is Washington, DC does a really good job with our metro system. It is very nice and clean. It goes all the way out into Virginia and Maryland as well. And the metro system is very convenient. And like I said, they make it really clean for all of the tourists and it's very affordable. I think they're getting something like 1 million riders a day or something like that. But the metro is very just like convenient to walk down. You can pretty much go anywhere and everywhere. Most people in Washington, DC actually don't have a car. Same for Arlington, Virginia. Most people just walk around, and all the walk scores in DC are going to be very high as well. Most of the city is very walkable, and they are making it more and more user friendly as far as walking around. They obviously want the tourists to be able to get around and go around places like Georgetown and make it very easy to eat. So most people that live here either take the metro or they walk, and that is a huge advantage, I think, to living in the city. Another cool thing that a lot of people will probably disagree with me on is DC has a very vibrant night and social life. They have some pretty cool venues over at the Wharf, which is a waterfront shopping area. They have the Anthem that was partially started by the Foo Fighters singer there, David Grohl, who's a local alumni here to Northern Virginia. He's from our area. They have all kinds of amazing music acts. When Dave Chappelle started touring again after COVID, that was the first place that he went as well and did his comedy show. And then of course, if you're into EDM music, they have Echo Stage as well, which was rated the #1 nightclub and EDM venue in all of the United States, even beating out places like Live, Miami. That is a very popular nightclub as well. And there are some big acts like Tiesto, David Guetta, all kinds of different people come through there all the time. There's all kinds of club, nightlife, restaurants in DC, and they are really popping. Some of those places go all night long, so definitely keep that in mind. It's really a great nightlife scene for well. Now we got to get into some of the negatives of living here in DC. All right, number one, as you can guess, the high cost of living. DC can get very expensive. The average rent is around $2,500 a month. Utilities, groceries, taxes, of course, can definitely be very expensive. That's something to keep in mind. A lot of people, if they come and work here on the Hill or they work for a defense contractor, they usually will start off with multiple roommates because it can get very expensive. So if you haven't really guessed yet, I am a realtor here in the Washington, D.C. area. Definitely follow me on Instagram at chriscolganteam. We talk about DC, Northern Virginia, Maryland, the DMV region all the time. And I drop breaking news like this. If you are thinking about buying or selling a home here in DC, definitely email me info@colganteam.com and subscribe to this channel. But listen to some of these real estate stats, right, for Washington, DC. So the average attached house, which would be like a townhome, a row home, sells for $788,000. And the average detached house, which would be like a single family home, sells for around $1.2 million. So housing can get very expensive. The median sold price in Washington, DC is going to be around $638,000. There is a pretty large condo market here as well. The average days on market is about 50 days, and then houses sell for 97% of asking price. So it can get very expensive here in the Washington, DC area. Another con, you've probably heard this before about Washington, DC and the DC area. The traffic here can be absolutely horrendous, especially if you're going outside of the city, like places like the Capitol Beltway or 66 or 395. I mean, it can take 45 minutes to go from one side of the city all the way to the other side, especially if you're going in and out to DC Maryland and Virginia. It can get really bad. The traffic here is notoriously terrible, but I will tell you, the last few years, I've gone to places like Florida, Phoenix, other areas, and their traffic is just as bad. That's one of the things that I recommend. If you're going to live in the city, I would definitely rely on the public transportation. I probably wouldn't have a car because it can also get really costly, but keep in mind, if you're going to be living outside of the city and working in the city, I would definitely come out here sometime and do a drive around during commute time and see what your commute time is going to be like, especially since the Trump administration made return to office a thing. There's a ton of people going into DC now, and traffic can get really bad. Another con when you're talking about Washington, DC, you got to imagine, right? Every 4 years, we usually have a new administration, or every 8 years, depending if the president gets re-elected. And that makes it a very transient area. So your kids could have one group of friends in school and the next year they're gone, right? People, when I was growing up around here, my friends were moving in and out all the time. The same for your coworkers, especially if they're military or government or they work for the CIA. They are getting shipped in and out all the time. So you will lose some friends due to their job market, or there's a new administration maybe that they worked for. So definitely keep that in mind. Like I said, it happened a lot. That's going to happen to your kids a lot, especially if they go to an area or they go to a school with a lot of the diplomats' children as well. They're going to lose a lot of friends. Definitely a very transient area. Number 4, obviously, as I just went over, another con is going to be the housing market here is pretty competitive. There is not a lot of houses for sale. Washington, DC definitely does have a huge housing shortage, so definitely keep that in mind. But the one thing I do like is the city's going through this like revitalization. There's tons of new areas popping up. The DC is always doing all kinds of different growth. They're making all kinds of new affordable housing units. One of the things that they're really working on is taking empty commercial spaces and turning them into apartments or condos condos, which I think is a huge thing, right? But the housing market here is definitely competitive. It is still even below pre-pandemic levels. So if you're thinking about buying, you definitely need an expert like me, of course, to help you navigate through that, but definitely keep that in mind. Another huge negative here is unless you're into politics, you might not like it because everyone talks about politics. There's a crazy political climate here, especially when you have the administrations changing every 4 to 8 years. People are always arguing about politics. Also, everybody always asks you what you do for a living. That's pretty much the main question that everyone asks here in the DMV, or who you voted for. Keep in mind, you will get involved with politics no matter what. It's like you would live in Los Angeles, right? And you're in the TV or the movie business, right? Like everyone's going to be involved with that. That's how it is here in Washington, D.C. Another thing is there is always demonstrations going on. There's always some kind of, walkout or strike going on. There is all kinds of things going on in the city, or a big parade or a big march, and it's shut down. Definitely keep that in mind. Like on the weekends, especially during the Cherry Blossom Festival, which is absolutely beautiful. It gets very populated with tourists. There's all kinds of people walking around. And like I said, especially when the Trump administration came in, there's all kinds of different, people literally would close down the streets and block the streets off, and it becomes a huge nightmare getting around. But DC does a pretty good job. But just keep in mind, pretty much you better get involved with politics. You don't have to be, but just keep in mind, if you go on a date or hang out with friends, they will definitely talk politics. All right, so I hope you guys enjoyed this quick video on all the pros and cons of living here in DC. Every week, I drop a new video on all things Washington, DC news, information, real estate, things coming to the area. So definitely check my channel. Definitely hit that subscribe button. Email me info@colganteam.com.